Today I'm going to give you some tips on digging and filling in a trench. This will be a fairly quick one, but I think I've got some valuable tips and hopefully it'll end up looking, well, like this side. Not fully finished yet, but let's get started. I'm going to start by showing you some of the digging techniques that I used. Well, not really digging techniques, but more about the spoils pile. We've got a lot of topsoil here, so what I've chosen to do is to have essentially 3 piles. You'll see along the far side over there, you'll see the sod. I tried to take off just the thinnest layer of sod that I could, set it as far as I could from the trench. Then the next pile you see is the topsoil.
I'm placing the topsoil between the sod and the trench.
On the other side of the trench is where I'm putting the subsoil. That way I can put it in the trench first when I'm filling, okay? And then I'll be able to pull the topsoil on top of it after maybe packing it down a little bit. And then finally that sod.
One other tip about handling the spoils, try to get them far enough away from the trench so that you can walk along the sides without having to trip over big dirt clods.
But the bulk of this video, I want to focus on using the loader to fill in the trench. I think I've got some techniques that can maybe help you. And yeah, let's get into it.
Now our goal here is to salvage as much of that grass as we possibly can. We'd like to get that subsoil pushed back into the trench, but yet keep that grass growing. Not only is it costly to start new grass, it also takes a lot of effort and it doesn't always work the first time, so anything we can do to keep our grass, we'd like to do that. So I'm going to try to share some tips on how I keep from scalping. Of course, others may do it differently. I just want to share my techniques. Since one of the best ways to learn is to fail, I want to show you a mistake right here. I had the bucket tipped a bit too far down and you can see the wheel spin. You can see that it pushed really hard there for a moment. Well, I was scalping. So this brings up how you can feel what's going on even though you can't necessarily see it. You should be pushing only loose dirt, not digging into the compacted soil, so it should push fairly easily and consistently. I should have stopped when I felt it spinning. Now the next tip I have is to pay close attention to your bucket level indicator. Now I've heard others scoff and say the bucket level indicator's a waste. They say they can see all they need with the bucket itself. Okay, fine, maybe they're just a better operator than me. For me, that bucket level indicator gives me the confidence that I'm not going to be tipped too far down or too far upward. We had seen the risk of being tipped too far downward, but to be tipped too far upward, you leave soil on the ground and you actually pack it down, making it even more difficult to pick up on a second run. If you can get that bucket at just the right angle there, flat like that, the grass will actually help you to keep from digging in. But it only has so much resistance. If you put a little bit more downward, if you're tipped a little bit too far forward, you can dig right in. If you have that bucket angle just right, you can put a good bit of down pressure. You can see that I've got the front wheels off the ground here. I don't always push down that hard, but you do have some flexibility. Okay, my next tip is probably going to be controversial as well. I do not use float mode for this. In fact, I rarely use float mode for anything. Okay, don't unsubscribe just because of that. At least hear me out. In theory, it seems like float would be perfect, but for me, it just seems to take too much control away from the operator. I'll be going along fine, and then all of a sudden it will lift the front wheels of the tractor off of the ground, or behave in some other unpredictable manner. Now the next tip, well, that's a little hard to describe because I just want to show that the tractor itself does make a difference. This bucket is flat all the way across the bottom, and that extra wide, or I guess I should say deep surface does make it easier to scoot right along on the grass. Now I'm comparing to the deer buckets when I say that. Next I want to point out the smoothness and sheer strength that you see in this tractor, and that's attributed to this transmission that you've heard me bragging on in the past if you watch our videos. You notice that it goes a consistent speed when it hits the pile. It doesn't slow down like a hydrostat does when it gets fully loaded. That strength and consistency really helps make the job easier. This is a hydro-mechanical transmission, so it gives you the strength of a gear drive or shuttle shift transmission while retaining the variable speed of a hydrostatic transmission. When I first heard of it years ago, I thought it was probably a gimmick, but hopefully you can see how it handles these large piles without even grunting. It does not slow down, it does not whine. I don't have to vary the pedal to keep that consistent speed either. So the equipment does make a difference. Now I've got a little confession to make. I was going to push this trench and close it without even getting the video camera out. But I found it so pleasing to watch that bucket scoot right over that grass without damage that I just had to show it to you. Got some comments on the geothermal heat exchanger install about making sure I keep these pipes as far apart as we can in the trench. And as you can see, we did a pretty good job on that, at least in most places. Okay, let's take a closer look at our work here and see if we did a very good job. There's a gouge there, a little one there. There's a little bit of soil left on top. At times I've taken a rake and pulled some of that off, but it looks fairly good. Hopefully this will be good enough for the grass to come out and come back through that. Later in this video, you'll get to see it after 2 or 3 weeks.
This is the pond edge, and as you know, we've had some trouble with leakage, at least before we redid our pond. So when we dug this out, we were a little concerned about that. And we bought oil dry this time because, well, we couldn't, get a whole semi-load of bentonite. Well, oil dry is bentonite. So is cat litter. I think it's best to get the non-clumping variety if you get cat litter. But we bought oil dry. It was a little bit cheaper and mixed it in with the soil right here. You can see some of the red in the oil dry right there. And we kind of packed that in as we went. And then we put that sod. I actually don't know if we have enough soil there. I'm afraid that sod may end up compacting more and actually being too low. But that's what we did. You can actually maybe even see some of the oil dry back in there. So it goes back several feet. I've let this set for about a week now. We got a big rain right after the first pushing in of this subsoil. And so I couldn't really work on it immediately. And now you can see that that subsoil is settled in there a lot. I think there's more settling to do there, and I'm going to try to get that pushed down a little bit before we pull that topsoil over the top. I couldn't do this, at least on this big of a trench, with a 1025R, but I have really good ground clearance with this Yanmar, and so I think I can just get myself over in that trench with the tractor, one wheel, and push that down. It may be a little harrowing along here in some areas where it's pretty deep, but we'll see how it goes. It seems like by turning my front wheel back and forth, I'm able to bust up some of those bigger clods. Overall, this is working pretty well. That rain really helped us to get some of this in a more, I would call it, mellow condition, ready to be packed down. Pretty deep right here. Camera lady seems to be concerned. I don't know. I wasn't concerned about tipping over. I'm concerned about getting stuck, but I'm not concerned about tipping over. Okay, now it's really deep right up here. So I better back out of that one. Now, it's not unusual to have to redistribute some of the soil, especially if you're an amateur trench digger. The reason is because when you're creating your spoils piles, you're not creating them sometimes exactly where the dirt needs to go back in. If you use a regular trencher, for example, that's even more exaggerated because the trencher always pulls it in one direction. It appears that I've got a little too much soil here, but we'll see how it compacts. Although I don't think I have a separate topsoil pile, so that may be why. This is where I filled on the pond, along the edge of the pond, and so there really was no topsoil here to try to salvage. Okay, now I'm going to pull the topsoil back.
Given that we've had this rain, I'm having to have a lot more down pressure than usual and tilt the bucket down just a little further than usual to get all that soil off the grass. This does damage the grass a little bit more, but there's really no choice. If we don't get the majority of that soil off the grass, it'll all die anyway. I think the trench has been open about 2 weeks now. The subsoil fill happened about a week after we dug it, and then we had to wait another week until it dried up after this rain. The grass under the topsoil there doesn't look very good, but it actually looks better than I expected. Let's run over it again, pack it down a little bit more before we put the sod on it. Now this was a pretty big trench. It was 2 foot wide and 4 foot deep, or maybe a little more in some areas. So there's a lot of dirt to deal with. You may be dealing with a trench that was dug by a trencher, may only be 4 inches wide, or maybe 12 inches wide, dug by a subcompact tractor backhoe. I find a really narrow trench difficult to compact as you fill it. You've seen in a recent video where we just drag the soil back and leave it piled on top. That's really about all I know to do. I take more time with these wider trenches. It seems like there's more compaction possible, and well, I end up with bigger piles of dirt that I have to somehow get stuffed back into the hole. I keep having this thought, it all came out of here somehow. How come we can't get it back in?
Now, I had intended this to be purely educational, using tools that everyone has, or, you know, most people that watch this channel have. But Christy is insisting on bringing out the big guns. I'm not really sure it's doing that much. You really like hamming it up.
I want to be a construction worker.
You need some high-vis yellow. We should have worn our
Yeah.
construction outfits.
Need a hard hat.
I just don't know how picky I'm going to get with this. If it were my dad and he had my brother and I to do the manual labor, he would have us turning over every piece of that sod and getting it right side up, making sure that everything was laid out the best it could be. And we'd end up with a pretty good job of getting it reseeded without, well, reseeding. I may not have that much passion. After all, I can always seed it again. But that gives you an indication of how to do it. You see, I mean, some of that right there, I'll try to turn over with my loader right there. Just a little piece there. See, by hand, you could turn that over. I almost got it. And that gets you a lot better chance. A lot of that grass will come back. It's surprising.
But more of it will come back if you can get the trench filled in a timely fashion. Have you ever seen a cat this comfortable around equipment? Well, at least one that's still alive.
So for this part, it's how much effort you're willing to exert. We may run back over with Ham, who knows?
I can hear my dad speaking to me, telling me I'm being lazy. I need to get out and straighten out that sod.
Okay, I'll make one trip along here and see if I can improve this any, and then we'll probably just roll it down again with ham. Now, don't let this roller discourage you. Your tractor can do just as good. This is just kind of fun. Not everyone has a friend they can borrow a ham roller from, right? Woo! That felt like it wanted to get tipsy. You think ham will float? In the title, I indicated how to dig and fill in a trench, and yet I didn't show any digging. Well, I really did show the critical part of digging. I showed how the spoils are separated. If you'll separate the subsoil from the topsoil, from the sod, right, that's the trick that I'm talking about. Now, I'm not arrogant enough to say that this is the only way to fill in a trench, or even the best way to deal with filling in a trench. But I have done several around here, and this is where I've come to. This is kind of the approach that I use. It starts with digging it with that separated approach, and then filling it in a little bit at a time. Subsoil first, topsoil, and then sod. The next steps in our case will depend on God. We probably won't water this. If we did water this, we would have a lot better results. Because we could get this sod to start growing much more quickly and maybe just keep it from dying overall. But we're not going to take that time. We just don't have that amount of time. So, you know, if it rains and handles that well, then great. Otherwise, well, we'll be reseeding it this fall. You can see there's a little bit of a hump left. It should still settle a little bit more. You know, we didn't do a perfect job of compacting that. I have more trench, as you saw, near the house, and that's a lot more complex because where I piled the soil to avoid the driveway, and it's just more complex. I wanted to show you a nice straight stretch of trench just to show you the general ideas. Hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on Tractor Time with Tim.
You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand.